Hello everyone, my name is Tom Digby-Rogers. I work for BSI, British Standards Institute. Today myself, my colleague Tim, will be talking about standards, how they're developed, BSI, who we are, how we do what we do, as well as focusing a little bit on smart cities and big data. And Tim, would you like to introduce yourself briefly or wait till...
So my role is about getting newer areas of digital standards going. So cybersecurity, Internet of Things, big data, blockchain, anything that's quite hyped basically. And today I'm just going to focus on the stuff I'm doing around big data at the moment.
Fantastic, yes. So BSI splits its standards development among our built environment sector, governance and resilience, sustainability, which is where I sit, and our manufacturing sector. So we do standards for anything and everything, whatever sector. But today, yes, I want to talk about smart cities. Tim will talk about big data. And I was going to say questions accepted throughout, but Peter mentioned to me earlier that he was planning on heckling me, so I think maybe if we leave that to the end. Right, so who we are. Okay, BSI is the UK National Standards Body. We have a Memorandum of Understanding with the government. We have our Royal Charter, which gives us this position to develop and publish all national standards. It is also the only route through which the UK voice can be channeled into the international and European standardisation arenas. We are a non-for-profit organisation, so everything that is made from standards goes back into sustaining our committees, our processes, which is important because I think what BSI really does, and where I think it is really where it adds value, is that we provide this non-partisan, neutral ground within which stakeholders from any kind of different area can gather and discuss the risks, the opportunities around any subject. So talking government, trade associations, NGOs, academia, anyone can get into a room together and discuss what matters to them and where is their role for standards. Individual business interests are left at the door as much as is realistic. This is about doing what is best for industry around a sector, the greater good, as it were. This is what this is about. We do not favour one faction over the other. BSI doesn't say favour government over a trade association. Everyone's voice is equal. That's the value of the environment. See, this is the problem when you appropriate a slide from somewhere else. I like a slide just to sort of pop straight up rather than click through a load of different things. So bear with me as I put that all up. Right, okay, so what do I mean by standards? They are, in essence, a distillation of what good practice looks like. It is based on the collective wisdom, the experience of those stakeholders, government, trade associations, what have you, getting together and saying, this is a process, this is a requirement for a product, this is a service for installing something, for maintaining, monitoring a particular practice. This is what good looks like. They are all open for consultation, so even if you're not on a committee, you have the opportunity to express your views on a particular standard. There's a proposal stage right at the start of the process, and there is a public comment stage after a standard has been developed to a certain level of technical maturity, at which point you can get involved, have your say. It's really important. They're also consensus-based. We don't vote by majority on a standard. If there is a problem between experts, between stakeholders, we make sure that is nurtured to a point where maybe we don't have 100% agreement, maybe not everyone is happy in the room, but critically, the solution is representative of everyone in the room. They're voluntary, not regulatory. This is the carrot, as opposed to, say, the government's stick. Standards are about, I suppose, enabling stakeholders, enabling industry to say what they want to do, what they think is good for their industry, for their sector to grow, and being able to put that into a document so that others can use it. I think the key part about that as well is that by going through this process, you build a level of assurance. People trust that experts have gathered into the room, put together something that looks good together, and that it is a collaborative effort. That combined momentum not just on a national level, but also on an international level. And that's really critical, especially when you're talking about investment in overseas opportunities. If everyone's working to the same standard, you can start communicating better with them, you can start trading better with them, you can start integrating different elements, either through of a service or a product. And I think what's really important is that without standards, we would all be working to different ideas. There would be mass duplication of effort. Everyone would be working to what they think is the best idea, and that wouldn't be compatible. Innovations wouldn't be recognised. Really, I suppose a standards body, not just BSI, but the international groups and every country's national standards body, is a recognition that there is a lot of value that can be created by working together and understanding what other parties want to do and how we can sort of combine that into a workable standard. Oh, another slide I need to do a load of clicks on, sorry about that. Don't want to click too far. No, I've clicked too far. Sorry, right, okay. Another way of sort of dividing this up in terms of what we do, BSI works in that red part of the mountain as opposed to, I suppose, well, the light red part of the mountain, or brown, I'm not quite sure what colour that is. Various different mechanisms that you can choose in order to get your deliverable, to get your standard. At the bottom there is a publicly available specification. This is where we've been doing a lot of stuff in smart cities and around this area. This is particularly useful when you need a quick turnaround. It takes around 9 to 10 months to develop a PAS. It doesn't have quite the same status as a formal standard because it's developed a bit more quickly. However, what it does do is enable you to really rapidly put together what a UK model might look like for something. And this is hugely important for where the UK wants to adopt a strategic position, a leadership position, by saying, here's our model, this is how we're going to get out in front. Other people can adopt that, use that, learn from it, and grow in a really positive manner. And it can also be migrated into the international arena as well. Again, a huge amount of value can be derived from saying, here's the UK version of what we think good looks like, adopt it internationally, and we're a couple of years ahead of everyone else. And you think about what kind of value you can get from being that far ahead of another market, especially in terms of what that means for the perception of the UK as a leader, as somewhere to invest in. Difficult to attribute a specific value to it, but certainly, I don't think anyone would argue that being out in front, being an early adopter, it's always to your benefit. National standards are developed over 18 years. You don't require, 18 months. Sorry. Yes, definitely 18 months. They don't require sponsorship, but again, it's another way of putting together something on a national level that can then be migrated into an international space to again, put that UK nose out in front. Takes a bit longer, so it's really about using the right deliverable for what you want to achieve. I should also say that they're also typically used for things where the UK has peculiarities in its market. So, for instance, the building industry, we have our building codes, building codes. They're all peculiar to the UK, so national standards are the way to go. European and international standards take 3 years to develop. It is a long time, but as I was saying to Andrew earlier, there's an awful lot of opportunity to faff around before actually pinning down an idea that you want to turn into a standard and then using that standard to do something more exciting than the actual standards development process. And it's much better to start earlier rather than later. As I'm on Europe, I might as well mention Brexit, get that off my chest. Our membership to the European Standards Organisation is not dependent on our membership to the European Union, so we remain a part of CEN and CENELEC, which again I would underline as being really important because it means that we have access to a table as the UK that we maybe will be losing by leaving the European Union. So it's a really valuable way in which we can still be talking with European colleagues about what they're doing and again working together. And then the international standards, right at the top, maximum impact from doing things together, which would be the ultimate aim. So we manage all this in our committees. I've mentioned the different sort of stakeholders. So this is a typical committee in terms of its representation. The value of the process, the value of the standards is dependent on getting that view round the table. And ultimately it comes down to how much industry want to invest their time in this. If you get a committee that just represents industry, then the result will not be representative. It will be focused very much on a narrow viewpoint, and the standards will not be as good. But it is a risk. It's always a risk when you're asking people to give up their time voluntarily, not just to sit at a committee meeting, but to actually sit down and have a think about what kind of standards are needed, what kind of processes, provisions, what have you, are needed. It all takes time, but there is a benefit, there is a light at the end of the tunnel in terms of getting that standard out there and making sure it's adopted. And within this committee, there is the responsibility to derive that consensus that I mentioned before, to make sure it's representative. So how we make standards, I mentioned that there are public comment phases, so even if you're not willing to get involved in the committee, it's still really important that you have your say. It's fine to be able to criticize a standard when you're using it, but the really important part is about telling us why the standard isn't working for you. If you don't, we don't know, and we assume the standard is correct and working well. And no one really benefits from that illusion, as it were. An idea can come from anywhere. And Andrew mentioned, who knows what this meeting might uncover in terms of an idea for a new standard. If you have a good idea, if you think that something isn't covered, yes, maybe it already is and you just don't know it, but maybe it isn't. And isn't it that much more worth it if you talk to us and say, we have an idea, we have something that we would like to achieve, and a standardized process, a consensus-driven process, could be a mechanism by which we can get there. And that idea is converted through the committee into a draft. Usually a smaller group will work together to come up with the technical provisions, which are then approved by the committee. You get your draft and you go out for public comment. So at this point you should be seeing something that maybe isn't editorially perfect, but that is technically where the wisdom of the collective thinks a process should be. All comments are reviewed. Do not think that if you put in a comment that it will not be reviewed. It may not be consistent with the UK view. It may be different, and it may be wrong, it may be right, who knows. The important thing is to get that comment in so that the committee does review it and does integrate it into the draft, does make sure that's part of the UK voice. If it's national, we'll deal with it on a national level. If it's international, we will be putting out a consistent, coherent UK view on a standard into the international arena, just as Germany will, just as the US will. And those will then be consensus driven towards your final publication. I think before I move on to smart cities, I think the important thing I really do want to underline with this is that this is an iterative process. After the standard is published, it's easy enough to think it's out there, it's fine, brilliant, job done. It isn't job done. It's so important for people to pick the standard up, to implement it, and to tell us where it's not going wrong, where it could be improved. Unless we hear about that, then we can't put it back into the process. Industry changes. There's always these hugely rapid developments, and we need to be able to react to that, but we can only do it by relying on your input. BSI ultimately is a mechanism. You out there, we were created by you, for you, but we rely on that input. Otherwise, we can't do anything. So on to what we've got in smart cities. So probably a pretty familiar slide in terms of common city challenges that you're all aware of. I suppose I would summarize it as that cities need to be doing more with less. So how do they do this? Well, in smart cities seems to be the collective idea of how you can address a lot of these challenges. And standards are valuable in this. They're not just about products. They're not just about what's the durability of a piece of metal. They can be much more than that. A standard can be written to be anything you want. And here, what we're really looking at with standards is trying to create, I suppose, an ecosystem in which innovation is possible. again, standards don't just have to be about mature industries where you really know what you're talking about. The steel industry as an example, the building industry, you really know what you're talking about. Things don't change that rapidly. Innovation, it's important to foster that as well and make sure that those UK innovations are finding markets out there. And standards are a way to do that. They're a way to, I suppose, coalesce what those innovations mean and being able to publish something through a national process to then express that in an international environment and say, yeah, this is what the UK is about. As well as increasing confidence, it's gone through a process. People have actually sat down and had a proper think about what smart cities mean. So that's where we started. Government investment prompted us to work with the Future Cities Catapult to create the City Standards Institute. I've seen a couple of members here today already. This is, I suppose, a representation of what we can do if we are sponsored and focused on trying to get a strategic lead on other countries. And it has been really, really effective. The sponsorship has gone into developing the PASs, the publicly available specifications that I mentioned earlier, the ones that can be rapidly turned around in about 9 months to a year. And that's all through this organisation. And these PAS documents, they've all been made freely available. And in fact, they've been downloaded thousands of times, which is fantastic because it means people are interested in this. They are recognising there's a problem and there's a way via standards that they can potentially address this. So here's a list of what they've produced to date. So we start off with PD8 100, which is a really fantastic document. It's not too long. It's only about 20 pages or something. And it provides a great entry point into looking at your city, understanding your capability, giving you a roadmap, helping you define a city's vision, a city's purpose. Then 8101 on the planning side, how do you plan your infrastructure? Smart City Framework, all about establishing your strategy. Terminology is so important when you're dealing with other partners, be they, say, a public-private relationship or something where you're dealing with international investors or so forth. If you're talking about the same thing, that will help. If you're talking about same term, different meaning, then you're in trouble. Onto the data side of things, so the data concept model. And I've mentioned PAS 212 there as well. That wasn't developed through CSI, but it's sort of part and parcel of what we're talking about. And I should have changed the highlighting on PAS 183 and 184 because they have just been published a couple of weeks ago. Decision-making framework for how you go about sharing data, and PAS 184 all about business case. How are you making sure that you can justify the investment in a smart solution? And then PAS 185 all around data security. And that's a very broad brush summary of what's there, but it is all publicly available. It is all freely downloadable. I would urge you to look them up, download them, have a look at them, and tell us what you think about them. But that's not the only place where standards are being developed. I mentioned the International Standardization Organisation, ISO. They've developed a raft of standards as well. Some of these have been based on UK model standards. So you'll see PAS 181, PAS 180, 182 are there. Other work that the CSI is doing is being put into this international model and is really, I suppose, this representation of what you can do. Take a UK model, put it into the international world and see what happens, because the UK, I see it, I go to these international meetings and the UK is well respected. People come to us for advice. People want to work with the UK and develop projects. Say, for instance, India, 100 smart cities, that's their goal. China, 200 smart cities. These are countries that desperately need our help because of what we've done to create that leadership position, which I think is really fantastic. Okay, and here's my secret shame, this slide.
Very brave.
Maybe top 10 worst slides ever, I don't know, but I'm also incredibly proud of it because I think it is doing a difficult thing, which is trying to create a map to document everything that's going on, not just in the world of standards, but also European Union initiatives, things like Espresso and so forth. How does it all fit together? Yes, initially that looks like a bit of a nightmare, but a closer look, I would hope, would start to reveal a few patterns, such as starting with your vision and purpose, PDA 100, moving into developing your strategy. I should have said these standards are not about saying this strategy is the right one to choose. It is about giving a city the tools in which they can understand what kind of strategy they need based on the peculiarities of their city services and so forth. Moving into the planning, the infrastructure projects, so a lot of standards around transport in ISO. They'll be moving into energy soon. Work around indicators. And I suppose importantly for me, two things are that data, I haven't worked out a way to make it look better, but data is what really informs all of those little bits. So there is meant to be a feedback loop. The data informs your vision and purpose, it informs your strategy, it informs your planning, and you get more good data the more you're sort of going through that iterative process, as well as the citizen being at the center. So yeah, where do you start? PDA 100, I've mentioned it before. I think it is a really good entry point if you're not familiar with standards in this space. It does provide you with a lot of good starting point type tips, guidance around this. And then there's PAS 181, the strategy guide. So that's helping set city leader values, which will govern decision making. It's helping you understand how to break down city barriers, behavior issues, etc. How do you join things up, as well as ensuring that all the intended benefits from your strategy are being implemented, managing your risk, etc., etc. Now, again, I'm sorry to name check you, Peter, but you mentioned management systems about being a bit of a nightmare. But yes, there is a management system for sustainable development, which is there to be implemented by a city. As an example, Hangzhou in China have been really banging the drum about this. Their intention is to create a city club for cities to join. If you are interested in that, do let me know. And it's coincidentally about creating a community of practice, about sharing what's happened in the city, how does this management system work in practice, what kind of lessons can be learned, and really building on the standard itself. So not about the standard, it's about what you do with the standard, which is important. So it uses a plan, do, check, act model similar to other management systems, but it recognizes that there is a limit to the city's control. You can't do a command and control model with a city. It has to be much more about persuading and influencing, so setting your purposes of sustainability, why are you doing this, mapping them against these 12 broader considerations such as innovation, governance, etc., and asking the city to ask questions of itself to work out where it sits. It also helps, it works with the indicator standard, the metric standard to help you understand what your city looks like, plotting what your city looks like, enabling you to compare it with other cities, identifying where things are going wrong or where there's an opportunity. I'm conscious I'm probably way over time. I do like to witter on. So I thought, given that we're here in partnership with the Urban Big Data Centre, I thought it would be worth mentioning a little bit more about the data side of things as well. So PAS 182, the data concept model, that's something that we've developed in the UK, and it's now going into ISO. It's been well received so far. So again, we've got this UK model on how to bring data together to extract value from it, and this is what PAS 182. Soon to be ISO IEC 30182 if you care about numbers, which you have to if you like standards. And what it does is it allows you to map different data sets together. So whether you're getting them from city databases or city centres, it's about making links, understanding the relationships between the various different data. So it becomes about the person rather than, say, about education or health, as an example. And PAS 183, which Jackie's going to talk about a bit later, is all about how you go about making good decisions to share that data and making sure that you're getting the most from it. Okay, I won't dwell on that much. In ISO, there is work developing on an ICT reference framework. split into 3 different parts: a business process framework, a knowledge management framework, and an engineering framework, all about enabling, helping the Chief Information Officer make the most from data. And what it's aimed at doing is allowing the aggregation of various different city databases, providing that insight into the city, transforming the data from what you're getting into machine-readable formats, and allowing a description of that city service to make sure that you can migrate it from city to city. You know, there's an ease of porting from city to city. And hopefully what that's doing is representing the value of what you can do when you join up knowledge, when you collaborate together based on a common understanding of the meaning and consistent use of the identifiers and classifications and so forth that come from data, and the value that you can get from this, reducing your costs, integrating your city services, engaging and enabling your citizens, which again sort of very consistent with that horrible slide I showed you earlier. This is another way to probably a slightly more easy on the eye version of that map that I wanted to leave you with before handing over to Tim. Hopefully these slides will be able to go out to you all afterwards, so you can I maybe not say marvel at them at your pleasure, but certainly use them to the best of your ability. And with that, I'll hand over to Tim. Thank you.